Right about now, we're going to start to change the pace and change the style.
I don't just speak to just say words. I feel like every time I speak, it has to mean something. Either it has to be some sort of information, some sort of detail, or some sort of, key to something. Like, I don't want to just say things that don't mean nothing. Because you don't want to just sound good, It's got to be something, Like, it's got to be something behind it. The foundation got to be strong.
Finally, last but not least, this is a subject I wanted to touch base on for a long time, was the number of marketing mistakes the Nets had made when they first touched down on the borough of Brooklyn. And even with the additions of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, it's still not going to correct all those mistakes that were made because it kind of left an imprint on the consumer's mind, aka the fans' mind around the city, on what kind of product the Nets are in comparison to the Knicks. You see, it's almost like a science in approaching selling a product in a market that's already dominated by a similar product. But with the Nets, this is a kind of a multi-layered complex issue, as it pretty much involved the owner who was not from the American market. Then when the Nets first showed up, they allowed players who had no understanding of what Brooklyn was to speak on the borough. And also another strike they had going against them was making the Brooklyn Nets look like another city's rival team, aka the Boston Celtics. And finally, I'll touch base on probably their most biggest mistake, which is an off the court thing, which was the most wasteful thing you could ever do in marketing, is trying to change the minds of people. The Nets should have realized they should have focused on changing their perception throughout the city on what their team represented. So first, I'm gonna start off with the Nets. They've always been marketed as a New York tri-state area team throughout the city for the past 35 years, ever since they moved to New Jersey in 1977. So off rip, you already have a long history of New Yorkers kind of viewing that team as a B-level team, especially when we always had the Knicks. So fast forwarding to 2012, when they first moved to Brooklyn, there was a few mistakes that they had made. First of all, they kept the same name. And second of all, they let too many players speak about Brooklyn when they didn't get acclimated into the borough yet. A lot of players like Gerald Wallace were saying that they were scared of the borough. Other players like Darren Williams were saying that they live elsewhere in New Jersey. A lot of the players were saying that they didn't live in the borough. They just came and practiced. So the team seemed distant from the borough off rip. You can see the major differences when the players start living where they play. Look at the 2019 Brooklyn Nets. Coach Kenny Atkinson lived in Brooklyn. Brook Lopez lived in Brooklyn. They had a lot of players who lived in Brooklyn. And you saw the originality oozing out of that team, as a lot of teams throughout the league was trying to imitate all the fun and dancing that they were doing that was going viral on the bench. So that was the first time that team ever looked like a Brooklyn team. They overachieved. They were young, fun, and full of originality. But going back to the earlier days of the Nets, a lot of the guys on the team, they were overpaid, like Joe Johnson, Darren Williams, Gerald Wallace. I mean, not only they were overpaid, they were pretty disconnected from the borough. Their energy levels just wasn't there. I mean, these guys were at different points in their career. They already made their money. They weren't hungry. The Nets should have came into Brooklyn with a more youthful team, with guys trying to prove themselves, kind of like how they were with Caris LeVert, Jarrett Allen, Spencer Dinwiddie, kind of like how they were in 2019. Because with that first year Brooklyn Nets team, that wasn't it. I mean, didn't they let Nate Robinson just kill them in the playoffs? The Bulls eliminated them in 7 games. Jimmy Butler didn't even play that well, and these guys got cooked. I mean, they were hanging up "Where's Darren Williams" posters all over Barclays Center. That's how bad that shit was. So once again, marketing is a battle of perception, not products. And the Nets, when they originally went to Brooklyn, they made a lot of changes. They went out and got Gerald Wallace, Joe Johnson. They tried to build this team up to make it look like a more competitive team, thinking that they could snag fans away from the Knicks. When in reality, they should have worked on their perception, maybe the name of their team, how the uniforms look like, the marketing around the team, what's going to be the team's identity. Because Brooklyn, man, it's a very unique place. Around the world, people know the name. And the team's branding has to really be on par with that. That's a lot to live up to. In my opinion, I believe the Nets were really lazy when it came to the branding of this team. They threw on the face of Jay-Z and they thought they had everything covered. And it's a little bit more than that. I mean, do you even remember the first time you seen the jerseys of the Brooklyn Nets? I remember thinking, wow, that shit looks so simple. The jersey designs almost came across as if they were trying to sell the word Brooklyn, which is a major thing that's going on around the borough right now. A lot of corporations are coming in and little mom and pop shops are opening up, and they're trying to monetize the word Brooklyn by throwing Brooklyn on everything. The Brooklyn burger, the Brooklyn bagel. An apartment building will be called the Brookline. Everyone's trying to commoditize the word, and the Brooklyn Nets jersey kind of gave off the same impression. And that's another strike that kind of went against the team. They came off as if they had no originality. They were just there to monetize the word like everyone else was doing, particularly outsiders. A lot of outsiders are coming into Brooklyn and they're just trying to commoditize the word. And in my opinion, the Brooklyn Nets were not trying to come off that way. That's why they used the face of Jay-Z to try to come into Brooklyn. Because at the same time, they already knew them building the stadium down in Flatbush, the area was going to change, and they didn't want to be perceived as gentrifiers. So that's why they used Jay's face a lot, especially if you notice when they first came in the borough. Jay had to show up to the game. Jay kind of had to be the face of this whole thing. That way, the people that were getting kicked out of their homes that they purchased years ago, in case that noise got bought up, at least Jay's face was on everything, and it took away a lot of heat from the Nets because they did a great job in using Jay-Z's likable image throughout the borough of Brooklyn. But then later on, we came to find out that he barely owned a percentage of the Brooklyn Nets. Now, with that being said, one of the biggest strikes against the Nets is making their team look like the Boston Celtics. I mean, come on. Trading for Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Jason Terry after they dominated the Eastern Conference for about 5 years prior to that, they made their team look like a rival city's team. That shit was a bad look. And I understand why it was done, because the Russian billionaire at the time, Prokhorov, he understood that he had to make a big move to make that first initial impression. Now in the business world, I'm pretty sure Prokhorov took a lot of calculated risk in order to make his billions. But unfortunately, in this scenario, this was not the right risk to take. And not only did that stunt the Brooklyn Nets on the court, but it stunted them as far as perception. Not only they're known for losing, the team looked like a bunch of outsiders. You had Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce posters hung up everywhere around Brooklyn. It just looked like Brooklyn was repping a Boston Celtics team. Now, for those of you watching on YouTube, look at this Sports Illustrated cover with Paul Pierce, Garnett, and Ray Allen as Boston Celtic members. Now look at it fast forward with Garnett and Paul Pierce wearing Brooklyn Nets jerseys. This does not signify Brooklyn. Brooklyn is a place of originality. They don't do copycat shit. Now look at this advertisement outside of Barclays Center with Garnett, Pierce, and Jason Terry. That does not look good. That does not look good at all. I mean, anyone with any common sense, especially if they were from New York City that worked for the Nets around this time, would look at that and be like, this is not good branding right here. We look like a rival city's team. How the fuck can we build on this? You see, there's a hierarchy when it comes to certain goods or services or just brands in the back of people's minds. You could say it's almost like an imaginary ladder. When you think of a car, jewelry, certain foods, you think of certain brands right away. When you think of New York City basketball, what's the first thing that comes up in your head? Knicks. Or when you think about cars, you could say Mercedes, Benz, BMW. You see, for the Nets, just like cars like BMW and Mercedes and Volvo, they can exist with the Knicks, but they have to sort of craft an identity where fans are like, okay, when I want a BMW, I'm thinking about the quality of the drive. Or when I'm thinking about Mercedes, it's the engineering, or Volvo, safety. But there's other brands that can exist side by side, but they craft a different identity. That's what the Nets have to focus on. And they have the word Brooklyn on their jerseys, which gives them already 90% of the help. All that's left is for them just to be original and think of new things. And once that new thing is attached to the word Brooklyn, it's gonna be like an explosion. It's gonna sell itself. I mean, look at Jerry Buss, a longtime owner of the Lakers that passed away. He was a visionary. He changed the whole way the basketball experience was like. He used the culture of LA with the celebrities. He did the whole red carpet rollout for people to come to the games. He did the cheerleaders. This guy was thinking ahead. The Nets just have to do half of that work and attach the word Brooklyn to it, and it will sell like liquid gold. But it's crazy because they lack a lot of originality. Look at their slogans. Once again, for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see right here in this poster with Jason Terry, Paul Pierce, and Kevin Garnett, "Hello Brooklyn, we're in." See, That's the problem with the Nets. You could tell they're outsiders. Just like how the people come over to Brooklyn and try to gentrify by tossing the word Brooklyn on everything, the Nets do the same thing. Everyone already knows you're Brooklyn. Just be fucking original. You're coming off like an outsider who's corny, who knows the word Brooklyn is cool and wants to throw it on a t-shirt or every coffee mug, or play Biggie and Jay-Z at every Nets game as if there's no other culture in Brooklyn outside of those two people. The Nets are gonna have to get some people that's culturally connected onto their branding team so they can go ahead and form an identity or an in-game experience so they don't have to waste time trying to convince people to leave the Knicks, because that's not gonna work. They're gonna have to do the same thing sort of what the Pittsburgh Steelers do. They use the identity of the city and it trickles down onto the identity of the team. That blue collar type toughness identity that the Steelers have, that's the identity that they go with. It represents the city. The Nets are going to have to get people that's culturally connected and form some sort of in-game experience or just an identity, a slogan, something that's original. It can't be a copycat. And you don't have to toss the word Brooklyn on everything. People already know you're from Brooklyn. Just toss some dope shit outside of that and people are just gonna associate the two. Now, one perfect example the Nets actually executed in making a creative, dope concept is the Coogee sweater city style jerseys. That was the first time I thought, wow, the Nets are actually getting their branding right, and it reflects the borough. Now, there's a lot with the borough. They're gonna have to take in the good and the bad. If you rock that Coogee sweater in a certain time period in Brooklyn, early 90s, late 80s, that means you were slinging that candy. And that was pretty much a dope boy's uniform. You probably got carjacked driving your Chevy Impala, and you probably almost got your head blown off a few times for rocking that sweater because someone thought you was a D-boy and they figured you would have fat stacks in your pocket. I mean, that Coogee sweater was a drug dealer's graduation cap and gown. But getting back to the point, this is one example of them just getting creative without tossing the word Brooklyn on everything. And at the same time, they maintain originality. You know, be also dope. You know, with the Coogee City Edition jerseys, they should allow fans for just a day or two, like a special edition, to customize those jerseys. Instead of players' names in the back, they should have the names of Brooklyn streets and avenues. Or even host an event that's kind of themed like a block party and have a promotion for those types of jerseys. It's just a random idea I just tossed out there, but these are the types of things that they can do. But there's just too much culture around the borough for them just to focus on the word Brooklyn, tossing it on every single piece of merchandise. It just doesn't make any sense. The Nets are going to have to think outside the box because they're always going to exist sort of the same way Coca-Cola exists with Pepsi. People automatically think of Coke over Pepsi, but Pepsi's still making their money, but they're second best. It won't matter what superstars they get, even if they have Kyrie and KD, it won't matter. They'll still be second fiddle to the Knicks. I mean, shit, even speaking of Kyrie and KD, those two guys, the perception of those two guys is really quirky. And I think the Nets, to soften up their image, that's why they have Steve Nash as a coach, because he's a well-liked guy. Other than that, their two superstars are not well-liked throughout the media, and they normally paint those two guys in a bad light. But anyway, regardless of what superstar they have, the Brooklyn Nets are going to have to enter the back of people's minds in a different way. What I mean by that is the same way you could say when you think about shipping, Federal Express, people think of speed, like I want a package overnight. But Federal Express was not the first shipping company, but people think of it in a different way. Same thing like McDonald's, people think of, oh, I'm gonna get my food fast. The Brooklyn Nets need to market themselves in that sort of way where subconsciously, when people think of the Nets, they think of something other than the Knicks or just basketball. They think something outside of it. Maybe they think of an experience subconsciously. Like the Lakers, even though in the past 12 years they were not able to get superstars, people still thought of the Lakers as a place where stars go. Because subconsciously, it's in the back of their minds. That's the genius behind Jerry Buss. He made you think of the Lakers as stars and Showtime. Because if they don't market themselves in this way, they're going to be stuck like many other sports franchises that play second fiddle in other cities, like the Anaheim Angels, the New York Mets. That's why I don't think Kevin Durant realizes when he says the younger players don't see the Knicks in that type of light. But what he should have asked them is, when you mention New York City basketball, what do you think of right away? I bet you most of them think of the Knicks. They think of the Knicks first. The Knicks are in their mind first because They entered the marketplace first. That's just how it is. Same thing when you say fast food burger joint. A lot of people instantly think of McDonald's. Even if you have a more favorable burger joint, maybe let's say Burger King or Wendy's, you still subconsciously think of McDonald's first. But the thing is with Kyrie Irving, he has a different relationship with the Nets. Kyrie Irving is a Jersey kid, and when he was coming up through the different leagues or ranks, he played against a lot of city kids, which he said they were trying to play him off like he wasn't good enough because he was from, the Jersey suburbs. But Kyrie has a different relationship with the Nets. That's why when he said, I'm going home, even though the Nets moved to Brooklyn, in his subconscious, he views the Nets as his hometown team. And the same rules apply for New York City basketball when it comes to NBA teams. Most people throughout the city view the Knicks as being the hometown franchise. It is what it is, but you guys, if you don't believe me, you guys can look up the history of a second-rate brand or sports franchise coming into the city and trying to take over. Historically, the odds are not good. In New York City, make no mistake about it, man, it's a basketball city. For the Nets to have the lowest attendance record and just overall viewership is low, it's not a good look, especially for a large market basketball city like New York. But I'm telling you, a lot of it has to do with the way the Nets branded themselves when they first arrived. And if you don't believe me, look at that 2018-19 season. The Nets had Jared Allen, Allen Crabbe, Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, D'Angelo Russell. They was doing all that dancing. It was a pretty good season for them. And they won 9 games in a row, and they were struggling to get fans to show up. I mean, during that 9-game stretch, Jared Dooley was on Twitter asking fans to show up to the games, just begging them, please come to the games, support us. We won 9 in a row. All this is on record, man. When you're in a position like how the Nets are in, trying to take over a first place brand in the marketplace, there's a certain science, a certain way you got to play that game.
The game is a game. Always.
Until next time, you guys stay safe. Peace.